All right, the webinar is now live and we're recording. So Benjamin, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Henrik. For everybody who is joined, we're going to go ahead and give folks a minute to join up, then we'll get started.
Yeah, we still have people joining, so I think we should, well, let's give them another minute or so, and then we can get started. Yeah, Benjamin, we still have a few people joining, so why don't we give them another half a minute or so to join, and then we can get started.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great. I think we have a close to full house here. So Benjamin, whenever you're ready, you can get started. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome to Gembah's webinar today, where we'll be looking at how you can diversify your supply chain and start sourcing outside of China. For those of you who are new to Gembah, we're a technology-enabled platform that enables creators to create incredible products that go from concept to market. For those of you listening who have attempted this journey, you know how challenging it can be. So whether we're talking industrial designers, engineers, safety compliance experts, sourcing agents, manufacturing vendors, quality inspectors, logistics officers, like the list just goes on and on. It's an incredible array of people that have to come together to design, make, and deliver the products that are all around us. And to make it even more difficult, oftentimes traditional sourcing companies or agents can make it feel like they're standing in between you and your goal. At Gembah, we strive to be your partner in this product journey. We want to be standing shoulder to shoulder with you, and we really find inspiration in the concept that great value can be found by going to the source where the value is added. It's part of our name, and it's our mission to take you to that source. When you can connect with the initial innovative spark and to get to that next solid research step, to get to the designer who then gets it into engineering form and ultimately to the factory floor who then births that concept into the physical world and then move that product to marketplace, and to do this with speed, quality, and being able to choose from a worldwide network of vendors and manufacturers. For us, that is going to the Gembah. And by journeying together, you can get your product to market faster with partners who fit your unique needs. So my name is Benjamin Hopwood. I serve as Gembah's head of supply chain. I've worked in industries ranging from aerospace to handicrafts to big box supply chain to consumer electronics. And it's been an amazing ride working with manufacturers and vendors from all over the world. At this point, I couldn't even begin to say how many manufacturing and distribution floors I've walked on. But what I can say is that the better you know your supply chain, your options when it comes to raw materials, your subcomponent suppliers, your assembly manufacturers, your logistics providers, and your distribution network. Essentially, the better you know your supply chain, the more agile you'll be both in future challenges and in the opportunities that present themselves. And opportunities at scale really, for us, is the name of the game, especially when it comes to supply chain strategies. So at Gembah, we're committed to walking with you in your product journey to introduce you to that larger opportunity. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our topic. So as we look at this, we're going to go through a number of different areas. One is what is the best market for you to source your product? We'll be looking at new and emerging markets. How can you avoid some of the extra costs from the US trade war with China? Going from there, looking at whether it's still possible to launch your product given the global pandemic restrictions. We'll finish up on the China side by discussing whether it's really still safe to work with them, and what are the alternatives. Finally, we'll get into, is it possible, and how do we get to a place where we get consistently good quality from overseas suppliers? And finally, we'll just end at the area of if this is your first time launching a product, how do you get started? Like for us on our product journey, how do we help our customers get to market? So what a year 2020 has really been. I mean, I think for all of us, different experiences to a degree, but kind of extreme. It's interesting. A long time ago, when I first got started with working, I actually worked for the CDC, and I was working in a genetics lab where we would pipette DNA sequencing and all sorts of stuff. But the interesting part of it was that right next to the lab I was working was a level 4 containment lab, where, if you're familiar, there was a book called The Hot Zone. And so when we use the word hot in relationship to anything around this previous year, it's a little bit, may not be the most apropos. But for us, I think as we look into 2021, I think that we really need to be looking at what are not only the challenges and the changes that have happened in 2020, but also what are the real opportunities. So for us, as we look at it with Gembah eyes, we look at places like Mexico and Vietnam and India and Eastern Europe, and even opportunities that have emerged in China. And we'll go ahead and go through those. We'll also talk about Asian countries a little bit. And then for us, we also serve markets in South America, but we'll not be covering that in today's talk. So to kick off our discussion, I'll jump straight into one of the global manufacturing powerhouses that really needs little introduction, China. Since China began opening up to foreign trade and free market reforms in the late 70s, it's averaged almost 10% GDP growth rate per year, and it's become the largest manufacturer and largest trade import partner with the US. It leads Mexico and Canada by more than 50%. This probably is not news to you, but what we have seen over the past year is an ongoing 2-year trade conflict. We've seen an emergence of a global pandemic. We've seen a myriad of other front page headlines. And so many of our customers have been coming to us asking serious questions about the viability of a China-only strategy. And when you layer on top of that the introduction of the Section 301 tariffs, with the majority of Chinese imports since 2018, again, we've seen this like renewed vigor with US companies really seeking to reduce risk by trying to find alternatives to manufacturing in China. Now, the 2 major countries that have benefited from this the most have been Vietnam and Mexico. But what we still see, and I think what's really important to talk about, is that China's embedded dominance as a global manufacturing group will not change overnight. China has a very robust internal supply chain network that can service almost any product category that you can think of. And in fact, it's been interesting because in 2020, as many of you know, we've actually seen an increase in US imports that have been coming through, as Chinese businesses were some of the quickest to get back to normal because of the virus control that went on early on in the country. So when we look at places in China, you can think of places like manufacturing hubs like Shenzhen and Guangzhou in the southern coast. These are going to be hotspots for inexpensive electronics and toy products moving forward into the future. You're going to consider places like Shaoxing and Zhejiang province, which is just outside of Shanghai, for customized textiles and clothing accessories. You have Hebei province, so this is in the northeast, that still does a great number of steel products and really high level stuff. But even today, what's interesting about it is that the travel into China remains highly restricted. For some of you, you may have tried to do this, and again, it's really tough at this point. And while internally, companies were moving quite quickly internally with China, we weren't experiencing much trade disruption. More recently, in January, we've been seeing renewed lockdowns that are happening throughout the country. And this has affected manufacturers going into the Chinese New Year. So again, some of the on-the-ground stuff that we're seeing even today is that people are being told that if they leave their province to go on the China Lunar New Year, that they're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. And so we've seen factories that have been closing early. And then we've also been seeing factories that are telling us that it's going to be about 14 days after Chinese New Year that they'll begin reopening. On top of this, and again, this is something that's been happening, has been that the shipping container situation in China has been greatly impacted due to cleaning protocols and a surge volume that's been going on. So pricing has been extremely high on the logistics side if you can get a booking to get your product out of the country. So for us, as we look forward with China, we really do recommend at this point that companies seek to source potentially their new products, that they should review their options for alternative markets, and that China may still be your best option in 2021 and beyond, especially if you have complex product assemblies, but that with the current state of the sea logistics costs, like the much longer Chinese New Year that's going on, an ongoing tariff war between China and the US, but we think that it really does make a lot of sense to begin looking at new emerging market directions. If you have plans to either one, scale your volume, or two, that your product requires a more labor-intensive manufacturing process. So if not China, what are some of your other market opportunities that we see in 2021? One of them is Mexico. So again, as the US's next door neighbor, it's the second largest import trading partner for the country, and it's a gateway to South America manufacturers. So we really do think that Mexico deserves your attention as a top strategic sourcing location for your next product launch. What we see is that for products involving electrical equipment, mid to high-end footwear, textiles, medical equipment, or furniture, that Mexico has become a hotspot alternative to China, especially post-tariff, and that many US companies are already beginning to realize benefits of making this shift. So what we see is that Mexico's manufacturers really heavily cater to US-based customers. And part of the reason is because they're able to have a shared time zone, and that from a language standpoint, there's less barriers oftentimes. Additionally, Mexico's average manufacturing labor rate is actually about 25% lower than China, making it a competitive location for more labor-intensive processes. So another real benefit as we look at Mexico is that they have a significantly reduced turnaround time. And this is important to companies, especially as they look at prototypes and samples going into the new product introduction process before they actually get to the full production piece, because you can have turnaround very, very quickly in terms of assessing both those prototypes and those samples. Additionally, when we have situations like with what we're seeing in Asia right now, where we have sea shipments that are at risk because of being delayed from high volume seasons or from pandemics or anything else, that the ability to ship over land is a huge strategic benefit to companies. So as we look at this, it's been interesting because while COVID-19 has actually restricted the movement of Americans into many parts of the world, that Mexico has remained largely open to US business travel. And so it's allowing a free flow of business in a way that's very difficult with anywhere else in the world right now. So when you think about Mexico, some of the things that we see, again, as mentioned before, are lower cost electronic assemblies for consumer goods and home appliances. We also see higher value electronics for IT or high-tech applications. Apparel manufacturing and shoe manufacturing is quite large in Mexico. And so these are, and then also any type of custom goods, things like leathers and other products, we're finding really, really good partners in these areas. So Mexico overall we found to be a relatively dependable, accessible, fast-growing supply market, even throughout 2020. And we think that it's really a prime location for 2021 if you're looking for competitive and a more predictable business environment. So beyond Mexico, we see a number of other options. Another big option that we see is in India. So India has a relatively fast changing supply market right now. And we believe that right now that it has a really bright future as we look into the next 5 years. So as you may know, US imports grew in India by over 6%, and that they're up over 170% over the last decade. And interestingly, last year, the US became India's largest trading partner, surpassing even China. Now, one of the big things in India today is make in India. And this is, it's not made in India, it's the present tense. But this is a major initiative by the government of India to incentivize investments into manufacturing, and they're targeting 25 economic sectors for job creation and skill enhancement. Overall, its goal is to actually increase the manufacturing's growth rate to 12 to 14%. So there's a lot of money flowing into this and a lot of focus. They want to create over 100 million additional manufacturing jobs by the end of 2022. And ultimately, where they want to get to is that they want the manufacturing sector's contribution to their GDP to get up to 25% by 2025. These are really lofty goals. But again, what we're seeing is we're seeing larger companies like GE, Siemens, HTC, and Boeing. There's a bunch of them. Apple and all of their sub-suppliers have been making extremely large investments into the country to go ahead and move manufacturing to these locations. Ultimately, or at least today, what we see is that India's manufacturing and supply chain ecosystem is not anywhere near as robust or mature as China today. But interestingly, again, we're also seeing companies like Walmart, where they're investing billions of dollars into small and medium-sized manufacturers to try and build up into a healthier ecosystem. I think what you can imagine this as is kind of a wave. And ultimately in business, you want to be kind of swimming in the right direction if you want to catch the wave. And so for us, we see India as a significant wave moving into the future, because we see all of this movement from the larger companies as well as investment. So why would you want to go to India? One would be if your product is quite labor intensive in the manufacturing. This is because India's average manufacturing labor rates are 70% lower than China. They're close to 60% lower than Mexico, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's 33% lower than Vietnam. So they actually can access really, really low cost labor. And so if you have longer assembly times, where anything's being hand assembled, this makes it a very, very interesting opportunity for groups. And while the US does not have a free trade agreement with India yet, the import tariff rates are still significantly lower than China post 2018. Now, a couple cautions with India of what we found. One is that many suppliers in India require a significantly higher minimum order quantity. And so in order to get started, and that additionally what we see that the lead times via sea freight can take between 4 to 8 weeks, which may be longer than what you're currently experiencing if you're in China. So what we find is that India is a really good supply market if you're ramping up your volumes or you're seeking to save significantly on your labor costs. Additionally, one other piece here is that while the language barrier is not significant, people speak English and largely throughout India, what we do find is that the cultural differences can be significant. So this is an area where again, Gembah partners with our clients to really make sure that they can navigate the culture of India. But ultimately, the Indian manufacturing ecosystem is expanding rapidly, and the country already has a strong tech sector. And so we expect this to be a real area of growth as we move forward. Moving back to East Asia, another area that we're really encouraging our clients to look at is Vietnam. So again, Vietnam has been a hot market for larger corporations over really the past decade. We see industries that are coming out of China, industries like furniture, footwear, metal castings, handicrafts. These types of work have all moved down to Vietnam. We also see higher tech, but higher volume type of opportunities like cell phones and others that have moved down. But again, on that side, the MOQs are not as small. But ultimately, for Vietnam, imports to the US have really surged. In 2019, they grew by over 36%. This was largely driven by US companies shifting their supply chains as a result of the US trade conflict. Footwear imports, as an example, grew by more than 11% in 2019, which makes up over 26% of all of the US market importing is coming from Vietnam. So significant amounts that we're seeing coming out of the country. Vietnam was also quite quick to contain the impact of COVID-19 in 2020, this past year. And it's the only Asian economy besides China that achieved a positive growth rate over the year. However, it has a much smaller population than China. So it's less than 10% the size of China. And so it has been experiencing skilled labor shortages. And so it's been struggling to keep up with surging demand. So what we see though is that this newly increased competition for the highly skilled labor will probably likely drive up labor costs in the coming years. But the labor cost today is still 54% lower than China. So there's a lot of headroom for kind of a ramp before we see anything close to China, and China labor is still continuing to go up. So if your product is related to a knit or woven apparel, furniture, footwear, textiles, these types of things, we really believe that Vietnam is an attractive supply option for our customers because the suppliers are really set up for it. In addition, in these areas and in these product categories, the suppliers are willing to do very small MOQs. And interestingly, the textile suppliers in Vietnam have actually been rated as one of the world's fastest speed to market. And so if you want to have a quick turnaround, we're finding a lot of success in Vietnam. Finally, is that obviously you want to do this without sacrificing quality. And that in terms of quality ratings, that Vietnam is actually among the top 10% in the world. So again, this is really a really interesting place to look at. It used to be that it was only the large companies that were moving to Vietnam, but we're seeing small to medium-sized businesses be very successful. And finally, and more recently in the news, there was some threats by the U.S. to add tariffs to products coming from Vietnam. Similar to the trade tariffs that were being placed on China. But ultimately, more recently, the decision looks to be from the US government that they will not be following through with those trade tariffs. And so it looks like we continue to have a good runway in this country. Finally, I wanted to just mention our ASEAN and our Eastern European Union countries. These are also ones that if you have specialty needs, that it may be interesting to begin looking into. On the ASEAN side of things, these are going to be countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And what we found is that they can really be ideal sources for niche imports into the US. For example, Malaysia is a prime supplier of apparel and rubber, whereas like Thailand is excellent in electronics, rubber, and plastics. So you see a lot of automotive that comes out of there, but you see a lot of consumer level products as well. And so And then also, if you're looking for customized products in the apparel side, as well as a high proficiency in English and low labor costs, we find that the Philippines can be an excellent choice as well. So oftentimes these countries, one thing to note though, when we look at the ASEAN region, is that oftentimes these countries, their supply chains are closely intermingled with China. And so there's a significant portion of subcomponents that are being brought in from China. So what this results in is that it can be a little bit slower speed to market, especially on the development side, until you actually get all of your inventory, all of your raw materials in. But that when customers are really looking for low cost supply or low cost labor, and they can match that with a ramp up plan, that again, these ASEAN countries are excellent options, similar to Vietnam. And as a final thought for today's talk, and when we look into different markets that are really interesting, some of you are probably very aware of some of the discussion around Industry 4.0, this idea that there's a lot of where manufacturing is going to technologies like machine vision and IoT and highly automated production. One of the places that we find that many people don't think about very much when they're sourcing is actually Eastern Europe. And what we've seen is that in quite a few groups in Eastern Europe, so countries like Poland as an example, we're actually seeing a lot of adoption of these types of technologies, which is actually canceling out the labor differentials between a place like China and Eastern Europe. And so if your product is expected to require like a sustained high volume machining or other sensitive high tech innovation, these suppliers that are in Eastern Europe are drawing upon a deep well of engineers, and that they're actually being highly competitive, not only as they serve the Western European market, but for other areas as well. So ultimately, though, as we move into 2021, beyond just the markets, what does it mean to begin responding to some of these supply chain trends? One of the things that I talk to our customers about is that in 2021, we really strongly recommend that you not simply go to China because of this idea of cheap labor. Interestingly, from 1980 until 2000, China really competed on low-cost labor, and people developed this idea that's where low-cost labor is. However, in the past 20 years, from the 2000s on, China's labor cost has actually increased nearly 1,000%, and this trend has actually only been accelerating. So in 2019 alone, the average Chinese wage increased by approximately 10%. So and even when you look in some of these larger cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen, they're actually on par with that of Eastern Europe. So as an example, a worker in Shanghai actually earns significantly more than many countries in Eastern Europe. So just thinking about China does not necessarily mean low cost. Now, that said, when we compare it to a place like the United States or Germany, China's factory labor rates are still highly competitive, with the average factory worker in China only costing about 10 to 20% of these counterparts. But when compared to other parts of the world, China has definitely been pulling away to the high side in comparison. So because of that, we're seeing a steady rise of attractive production ecosystems in places like Mexico and Vietnam and India and other Asian countries which are benefiting from this. That said, why should you go to China, or why should you really stay in China? One of the reasons that we think about staying in China is if you need a strong engineering talent. And I mean like really strong engineering talent. We're seeing that in China really, it's not just emerging, it's been there for a while, and that it's only, it's accelerating in its pace. So we also see a robust supply network when you need to have multiple commodity types. So if you need to be in one place where you're pulling in subcomponents from multiple different markets, this is a great place to be. The other piece is that if you're if you're interested into selling into really an enormous domestic Chinese market. So for companies that are looking at a strategy of not only manufacturing for export, but really are looking with an eye to get into the Chinese market, that can be another reason to really go and to stay in there. But if you're looking at commoditized textiles like apparels, furniture, jewelry, simple plastics, and even electronic designs, especially at higher volumes, Gembah can actually guide you to really strong Chinese alternatives that will provide you with world-class quality and a professionalism at a lower cost. As an example, if you have a consumer electronics with a lot of assembly in it, just even within the East Asia side, you can find 20 to 30% lower costs in countries like Indonesia and Thailand. And again, what we find is normally 20% plus tends to be kind of a magic number where companies really start to look seriously about changing up their supply chain and their manufacturers. So the second piece of this is kind of this question of how do we find increased security in an increasingly uncertain supply chain world? And especially after coming out of 2020 with the COVID pandemic, this is something that's very real, I think, both to buying groups as well as supply chain. And oftentimes it can feel especially pointed. But the reality is that this has been going on in supply chain for a long time. And one of the best strategies here is diversification if you can do it. One lesson that over the past few years has taught us is that the world can change quickly. And that companies really need to create contingency plans to diversify their sourcing dependency. And they really need to be looking deep into their supply chain to understand where those dependencies lie. So for Gembah, we can create for you a personalized long-term supply chain strategy for your company to really achieve these product launch goals while minimizing potentially catastrophic risks. So as an example, you might find that working with a supplier in Mexico is really perfect for rapid prototyping and an expedited sample development goals. If you're doing something like a Kickstarter or you're still kind of really in the middle of that development space, and that this overall speeds up the product design schedule. But that a supplier in China or Vietnam may be better suited for your low volume production order quantities. And then as you scale volume, you may find that a dedicated supplier in India will actually lower your overall production costs. Now, these things don't happen, in a month-to-month type of basis. You really want to try and game this out to look at what your product development is going to look like, what your market development is going to look like, and then be ready to be agile as you move forward. So the final one is just that we find that it's really important to partner with a supply chain expert if that's at all possible for your organization. I put this picture here. To me, a lot of times this kind of feels like the product development journey of, the mountain in front of you is a place that you want to get to. There's something good at the top. It's a little bit cloudy on the top. But even as you're kind of thinking through how are you going to approach this project, this new product launch, you find yourself in a place where it's like either you have a group that you're working with today and or you're launching something new, and trying to get there can be really difficult. You look down and it's like, actually, I'm on ice. And so you're trying to figure out what is the path forward. So for us as Gembah, that's a lot of what we want to work with our customers on is just going shoulder to shoulder into the market to go ahead, identify groups. And for us as an organization, we try to be extremely transparent about helping to get you to the market to find the right group and the right strategy for your next product launch. So what does this look like? Just to give you an example of for say an organization that's in China today, you have a product that's going on. Oftentimes we find that customers, when they come to us, they're very China dependent. This can be for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons is that they don't actually have their own IP. they haven't taken the time to really document what is their product and their product documentation. That's something that the Gembah helps a lot of our customers do. And ultimately for them, they're looking at it and they're kind of seeing that this burning platform, which is they're not sure how long these 25% tariffs are going to be continuing. And they continue to see rising labor costs that may not be offset by production efficiencies. But then the second part is that after you've actually kind of looked at your product, you've tried to decide, okay, what do we need to have in terms of product documentation? What we find oftentimes is the best way to work with this is to continue working with your China supplier to have them manufacturing a lot of the finished components, but then to look at a strategy of beginning to send those components to an alternative country for final assembly. This then allows you to do a dual sourcing opportunity for a period of time to really test out your new production partner. It's also possible that in doing that, that depending on the percentage of products that are coming from China, and that maybe be going into the new country, to begin looking at what it would take to begin avoiding a Section 301 import tariff on your products coming in. Kind of a step 3 is then once you feel like your assembly is going well, you may have actually started to begin sourcing components in that new country or that new market. But then you begin to look at things, higher cost things, higher value manufacturing pieces like your molds and your specialty tooling. That you begin looking at what would a transition look like from the original country to the new country. And oftentimes there's a ramp up process where you make sure that you have enough safety stock to successfully kind of bridge the chasm on that side. This is really a critical activity. And it's an area where we're working with a group that's done it before is important. The final one is kind of a full transition into the new market. And so this is where you actually look at molds have been transferred, specialty tooling has been transferred, and all of your subcomponents are there. That said, we do still find that some components are still cheaper coming out of the Chinese market. So this may be like high volume types of product. So like as an example, in the past, I personally worked in the automotive side of things. And so if you're looking at low horsepower, somewhere in between 1 to 15 horsepower motors, DC motors, it's going to be hard to beat China for a really, really long time. It may be possible, but you may still be pulling in some of those products. If for you as an organization that you're looking to fully diversify away from China, then that's absolutely possible. And because of either labor, cost differentials or other things, you'll likely still see a really good outcome in terms of lower costs to you over a longer term period. So kind of getting to the end of our talk today, what are some of our predictions for 2021 and really moving in through 2025? One of the trends that we really think is a big one. Trends come into and out of fashion. It happens. But we really believe that sustainable product design is going to be a trend that continues to rise in demand each year. As an example, we're seeing 9 out of 10 Generation Z consumers. They believe that the companies have a responsibility to address environmental and social issues. And that this group, when it's combined with millennials, it represents almost $350 billion of spending power in the US. And the Generation Z alone represents 40% of the global consumer population. Because of that, these things that are important to these groups, I think we can say are likely going to be important moving forward. And so as a group, as a company, as you're looking at your product, there's sustainable product design that it can be a really savvy business move. As an example, Amazon has compact by design. So back in late last year, they went ahead and they started putting together certification rewards, so labels that can be on your product and on their website if you use more efficient packaging for your products. Now, interestingly, if you're using more efficient packaging for your products, your logistics costs should also go down. And so, kind of winning on both sides, which is that you get product placement that's better, um, and you get a better sense from your customer about being a responsible company. And then the third piece is that you get a boosted profit margin from shipping. So again, these types of options we really think are an interesting play for groups. And oftentimes when customers come to us, they don't even really, to be honest, they're not even really thinking about packaging or these types of things. They're right now at a place of saying, maybe we want to kind of use renewable materials. But we would say not only renewable materials in your product, but you can also start to look pretty aggressively at some of these other options like packaging as well. A second one, in terms of from a prediction standpoint, we get a lot of questions, as I mentioned before, as to whether we think kind of the US-China trade war tariff is going to continue. Again, this one's a little bit more difficult of a question, but that 25% minimum import fee that's being added to products sourced from China, that the U.S., as many of you probably know, the U.S. importer is 100% responsible to pay these fees. Trying to get around this is not a good idea. And what we've seen is we've seen more and more crackdowns going on where U.S. firms are reporting this to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is getting involved where people are trying to get around this. So some companies are just passing these costs on to the consumers by increasing the pricing, but if you're competitive, it is not but we believe that you'll lose competition, or that in the competition that you'll lose ultimately if you start raising prices. Your market share will suffer. And interestingly, the incoming Biden administration has already signaled that they will not be swift to abolish these tariffs. So we expect that they will continue to be used as a bargaining tool in the U.S.-China trade conflict. So our advice on this one is stop holding your breath for a trade deal, and really start reviewing some of your China alternative options if this is hurting your business. And while we do cautiously predict that these extra tariffs will be removed prior to 2025, it may take an additional 1 to 2 years for a full trade deal with China to be reached. And then even once it's reached, that trade or that tariff removal process may be phased out over multiple years. So again, we really believe that the name of the game is being agile at scale. And so if options are available, you may find that there's some great partners that are outside of the China ecosystem. The final one is the pandemic impact, and specifically in the e-commerce expansion. So obviously, COVID's been felt by nearly every person on the planet. For some, it's been isolation, or even it's been devastating to others. It's created economic anxiety. It's created unemployment. All of these things are very real. But interestingly, again, e-commerce, as many of you know, it has been exploding in terms of the overall sales that have been going on. But this wasn't just the pandemic. This had been a trend that had been ongoing and had been steadily growing for many, many years. And we did see a surge with the pandemic in online shipping, or online shopping, excuse me. So example, like with Amazon, they were already well established to serve these online customers, and they saw almost a 40% year-over-year growth in 2020. So again, this has been hurting, your brick and mortar retailers like Best Buy, Target, and Kroger. But for those groups in their e-commerce side, they saw massive growth. In the first two cases, they grew by over 100%, and Kroger grew by almost 80%. So again, we really believe that this area of e-commerce expansion is not just something for this pandemic year, but it's an overall trend that's going to be continuing to move forward. So we would put this in kind of what we think of as the new normal, even as we emerge out of the pandemic into the next couple years. But how do you respond to e-commerce expansion? Again, packaging is a huge one. Finding packaging that's optimized not only for your clients, but then also for your distribution centers is a great opportunity. Another one is drop shipping. And creating service level agreements with your suppliers and your vendors to make sure that you don't experience stock outages. These are all places that in the supply chain we're currently helping our customers as we move into 2021. So ultimately, what does it look like to partner with Gembah? We are super excited to get to meet you. We've seen so many amazing products in our journey with our customers, and we're excited to get to work with you as well. For you, if you already have a product and you're experiencing 25% tariffs in China, we'd love to explore with you what's out there in the marketplace. For us, we look at kind of four areas that we really work in. One is that we work in design optimization and product specification sheet development. We also work to go out and vet the market. We can do research reports for you and really look to see, like, is this product, how will it do in the marketplace? The second piece of what we do is in supply chain strategy development and partner development. And so once you have your designs and specifications completed, we work with you to identify your ideal supply chain strategy and then work with you on a product launch to go all the way to full scale volume. From there, and additionally to that, we help you to identify long-term relationships with different manufacturers in different areas. And then we help you to vet those groups. And as I mentioned before, our goal is not to stand in front of you and try and control that relationship. We try and provide as much information to our clients as possible and stand shoulder to shoulder in those decisions. The third part is then to go into a prototype and sample development, which is a pretty significant piece. Oftentimes people think that this is just ship me the sample. And in some cases, if you're white labeling, that may be the case. But oftentimes for our customers, if they're going with a product plus one strategy, where they've gone and they've said, I really want this piece of functionality to be added to a product, then it does take prototyping and sample development with the chosen manufacturer and going through the approval process and then going into a production launch, which finally takes us into the fourth part, which is not just the launch, but then also managing your manufacturing. This is an area for some groups that as they look at their product journey, that they really want to go ahead and get to launch, and then they already have teams that can go ahead and take over from there. And then we have other customers who we work with to actually be their manufacturing team on the ground longer term, and to really be their face into the manufacturer, helping them with things like quality, helping them with things like cost down over a longer period of time. But whichever way you're looking to either launch a new product or to transition a product, just really look forward to potentially partnering with you, and very much hope that we'll get to talk about your product more as we go forward. So I'll go ahead and end here. We've got about 10 minutes left. Go ahead and open it up, Henrik, if we could, for question and answers.
Yes, we have a few questions here. Thanks you, Benjamin. It was very, very informative. Really appreciate you taking the time to put that together. First, a question from Matt. This question is, can you speak to factory and product inspection in these regions? So it's coming from that, in China, it's relatively well known how to vet factories and do inspections, but can you talk a little bit about the other regions?
Sure. Yeah. And so for us as an organization, we work to either partner with groups that are in the region that are very, very high level groups, and or to do this in-house in terms of working to qualify the product. And when I mention the qualifying part of it, so for some groups, it's kind of, we have to work with them to actually say, what is quality? What is good? What does that quality checklist look like? What are we going to be measuring? and ultimately what AQLs do we want to be hitting with the product. We can then, again, as I mentioned, we can do that in-house, or we can work with an outsourced group to do that. But in all of the regions that I've mentioned, we already have very established relationships and teams that are on the ground to make this happen for you. A second part, just as a note, is that in the longer term manufacturing relationship that we have with some of our customers, part of quality is not just quality control, where it's going on at the end of the production line. Part of this is also what we call quality assurance. And when we work with groups on quality assurance, if this is something that you're interested in, we actually work with our partners and with our manufacturers to establish, for instance, what are the top 3 quality issues that are affecting manufacturing that's leading to waste? Is it a material? Is it a process? These types of things to help make that visible. And then by working with the manufacturer and with you to then address those issues such that you can achieve good cost down over time, as well as a really good relationship with the manufacturer.
That's great. Thank you. Bryce is asking, and don't have a ton of time, but he would want you to just speak briefly on manufacturing in the US. Sure.
So manufacturing in the US, I am super excited about where this can go. Many of you may be familiar that the Biden administration has recently announced that there's going to be significant investments going on in the US manufacturing. This is where I got my start. I started at a small company called Lockheed way back in the day. But I do anticipate that we're going to be seeing significant automation continuing to grow in the US. There's a number of technologies, as I mentioned, not just on the IoT side, but like especially on intelligent or machine vision that's going on that I expect to see accelerating in the US. Now, interestingly, we are seeing these technologies, as I mentioned, in Eastern Europe and then in China also being applied. But this is really helping organizations to reach a much higher level of quality at a much faster rate. And then in addition, for many companies, they're looking to try and get their MOQs down, such that if you need something quickly, you can have it made here. And then quite frankly, there's a number of American manufacturers to where they're just beating the socks off of other folks just because they're awesome. That said, unfortunately, we have seen quite a few industries move overseas. And part of what I think is important to understand is that there's the production part of manufacturing, but then there's also the engineering part of manufacturing. So like, for instance, if we were to look at the magnetics industry or the power electronics industry, these are industries where if you really want to find an expert in this area, most of even the large US companies, their engineering talent is overseas today. And when you see the engineering talent that's moved over, it becomes harder then to just move something back quickly. We'll see as we move forward. I'm optimistic on US manufacturing. I think especially if you're doing small runs at a higher cost and you need to trade time for money, there can be some great partners that can be found here. And then in certain very specific industries, we see some good ones.
Thanks, Benjamin. A little bit related to that, a couple questions about 3D manufacturing. One is around, could you use 3D printing to make prototypes in the US? And another question around, how do you think 3D will factor in supply chains over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so this has been an area that pretty much if you talk with companies about every 2 months, they tend to have some new material or even a new process that's going on. This is moving extremely fast right now. And so if we were to look, as many of you may know, like 2-3 years ago, a lot of times when people were making stuff that was 3D manufactured or additive manufactured, the products were primarily to kind of get a sense of, like the feel, like what's the product going to look like? What are the basic dimensions? These types of things. They weren't really functional products. But again, over the past couple years, we've been seeing a greater adoption of products, especially in the high complexity category, where we're in metals and in other areas, that we're actually seeing companies design into the product, design such that it's less expensive to in some cases to manufacture with that. Now again, this would be in like casted types of highly complex materials that where this is going on, and we see use cases primarily today in the area of aerospace and medical and specialty markets. What I would say, like as you look forward and as you think about like where you might want to see this in manufacturing, is once you start to see this start to get out of those three areas, that'll be your cue that like the process has arrived. Now, from a prototyping standpoint, I think that this is also it's a great question to ask. To us, as we look at this, yes, you can absolutely prototype overseas if you have manufacturers overseas, and you can partner with groups that have fast prototyping capabilities. Now, if their engineering team is primarily, like if you think about kind of where the engineering and design group is, if it's primarily overseas and you're relying on them for that design, you'll want to make sure that they either have the fast prototyping in-house, or that that they have a very strong supplier relationship with a group that's close by. However, if you're an organization that has a lot of engineering here in the US, then I would say, or Europe or other places, if it's much more closer to home for you, this is where, yes, you'll want to have a very strong relationship with a quick turn, fast prototype type of group that can really help you avoid a lot of problems along the way. That said, one caveat on this is that even while fast prototyping has allowed your designers and your engineers to solve some of the initial problems, ultimately for us as Gembah, one of the things that we see is that we want to take you to the source of wherever it's going to be manufactured. The reason is because ultimately, if the process is at an overseas supplier or even a domestic supplier, you need to know what processes they're going to be able to use, because their experts in their group will be able to tell you very, very quickly if what the current designers you're using is going to be applicable to their manufacturing process. So the earlier that you can get those two pieces connected up, the better in our experience.
Thanks, Benjamin. I think we have time for one last question, just 1 or 2 minutes on, we got a couple of questions about Mexico specifically. One about, from Victor about what are the biggest challenges you experienced with supply in Mexico? Any ideas on how to overcome them? And another question around sort of the main materials or products that you've had success with in Mexico, if you have time. So just 1 minute on that, please.
Sure. So I think what's interesting about one of the big challenges that we've found, as an example with Mexico is that geographically it's a very close region. And so if most of the supply chain, if not all of the subcomponents for the product are coming out of that region, it can be a really, really attractive option. However, for quite a number of products, you may find that there's subcomponents that are still being produced in other countries out of Asia. And when this ends up happening, it can again, this goes to like looking at your supply chain in depth, is that your assembler may be in Mexico, but if you have subcomponents that are coming out of Asia, that may end up making it such that you can't manufacture your product. And so this is where you want to be careful about assuming that just because it's there, that you'll always be in supply. So that's one issue that we found. A second one is that we also find that sometimes customers get tripped up with the area of certifications. As an example, so like in health or in medical products, obviously with PPE, that was a huge thing. that factories are oftentimes, but it's not just PPE, will be certified to different levels and certified for different processes. That you need to make sure that, again, just because they're close by doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be certified to work with you. And so that's another piece. The third one is that as we've gone through COVID, you also have to look at how much of the workforce is actually at the factories. And so as an example, in Mexico, we have started to find that their factories are starting up again, but that for certain periods of time during the pandemic, that there were serious government restrictions on the factories. And again, this was going on worldwide, but these were all challenges that we saw in 2020. Again, on the manufacturing side, we see a lot of different types of products that can be manufactured in Mexico. We also see, countries like Colombia and others that can support in that. And so again, I would say, let us see your product, and we can very, very quickly tell you whether it's going to be applicable in those areas. But certainly, if you're looking at apparel, if you're looking at consumer goods, like home appliances or other lower cost electronic assemblies, these are all things that, and all the way up to the high tech side, that Mexico does have a strong manufacturing ecosystem. So again, we look forward to seeing what you want to produce and to trying to find the customized solution for you as to which partners to go with.
That's great. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for this great presentation. Thanks to all the participants that listened in and contributed with great questions. We have recorded this presentation and we'll distribute that to all the attendees after the fact, probably later on today. So thanks again for your contributions and participation. And thanks, Benjamin, for a great presentation. Have a great day. Bye-bye.